going to air it out down the field. Catch and a touchdown.
It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Here's your host, Nick Kosko.
Welcome inside to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu. I'm your host, Nick Kosko, and boy, we have a loaded show for you this week. Week 5 of the college football season, week 3 of our show right here. We are in the green, folks. That's right, with Nick's picks, which you can hear at the end of the show. And of course, every Wednesday on Back Your Play with Rich Quinones right here on AM 1490 at 4:20 on Wednesdays. Boy, we are 4-3-2. 4-3-2. That's right. So ignore those pushes. We are in the green. We have made money. We have not lost money, and we're not even breaking even. We are above. All right. We are in the green, folks, and it was a solid week last week. 2 pushes, 1 loss, and 2 wins. But you know what? That's all right. It happens. It happens. But at least we're not down in the dumps, right? So we have a nice 5-pack of picks for you later in the show. I'll give you the lines on South Carolina, Florida, Auburn, Georgia, Oklahoma, Iowa State, North Carolina, Boston College, and of course Baylor, West Virginia as well. Those are my 5 games to look at this week, and I just have a funny feeling about some of these teams, especially in the SEC and Big 12. But we're going to start the show today with some intriguing matchups, and we will talk about Auburn and Georgia momentarily. We're also going to dive into Texas A&M and Alabama. We'll give you these updated lines as we go throughout the show, and maybe we'll sneak in some Big 12 talk as well before we even dive into the picks. But just the landscape of college football right now. So we are still in that area of we're waiting on the Big 10, we're waiting on the Pac-12, we are waiting on the Mountain West to come back. They just announced their schedule the other night. So we're waiting on those conferences to come back, and we had the news that the college football playoff vote was going to be delayed as well, just to account for the Pac-12 a little bit. But other than that, there hasn't really been anything earth-shattering this past week, other than if you go back to last week's results where the SEC came back. You saw Mississippi State shock LSU on the road. Not really shock, but it was more of a shock of how that offense looked under Mike Leach, his first game. I told you guys last week that was the game to watch. Mississippi State at LSU, 44-34. Mississippi State knocks off LSU, so LSU falls from number 6 to number 20, and Mississippi State went from unranked to number 16. So, you saw some high-powered offenses in that game last week. And KJ Costello looks like the real deal in Mike Leach's offense. And we know Mike Leach, he has that air raid offense. All right, and it puts up, yards upon yards, points upon points. It's basically 75, not 80% passing in that offense. It's worked well in the Big 12, and it worked well in the Pac-12, where he was for the past, 15, 20 years at this point with Texas Tech and Washington State, respectively. And now he brings over that offense to the SEC. So what does that mean for the SEC? How does that exactly affect the landscape of this conference? We know this conference has traditionally it's big on the offensive and defensive lines. It's big on the running game, and it's big on pro-style quarterback play where you're not throwing it 50 times a game. You're throwing 25 times a game, maybe 30 times a game, but you're running the football, and a lot of these games are predicated on the offensive and defensive lines. So when you really try to break it all down for the SEC, Mike Leach is doing something absolutely absurd in this conference with Mississippi State. And now KJ Costello, over 600 yards, he had 5 touchdowns. Now, what does that mean moving forward for the Bulldogs? To me, it's fascinating. Because they host Arkansas tonight at 7:30. Arkansas, probably going to be a bottom-of-the-barrel team this year in the SEC. They got walloped by Georgia last week, and Georgia is still trying to figure out their quarterback situation. We'll dive into that in a second as well. But, you look at Mississippi State, 17-point favorite on the road tonight, really. Wouldn't you expect them to put up that many points within the first, 10 minutes? Is Arkansas, Mississippi State's defense, maybe not a world beater, but don't get me wrong, they were going up against LSU last week, right? Arkansas's offense only put up 7 points against Georgia. Georgia's defense is better, I'd say, at this point than LSU's defense. Don't forget, LSU lost 14, 15, 16, 17 guys to the NFL draft last year to the NFL. And don't forget, they also, on offense, they lost Jamar Chase, who opted out. Their star wide receivers, and they're using a new quarterback. But LSU's offense is still good. Their defense is still somewhat solid. And Mississippi State put that kind of slacking on them on the road last week. That line, I don't know, 17 points at home against Arkansas. Mike Leach making his home SEC debut. To me, that just seems it's not enough. I expected that line to be in the 20s, just based on how Arkansas played last week against Georgia. Now, granted, Arkansas was giving Georgia fits early in that game, but then when you have a backup quarterback coming for Georgia in Stetson Bennett, Arkansas, their defense, all of a sudden the wheels fall off. So that line for me, for Mississippi State at minus 17, is a little intriguing, although it's something I wouldn't touch this week. But then again, you could easily see this Bulldogs offense be up by 20, 21 points, 24 points at the end of the first half. Now, that's not to say that they wouldn't go on cruise control, but usually teams would maybe go on cruise control there because they're in control of that football game. Now Mississippi State, this team's going to keep airing it out. They were up by, I believe, 17 last week. I would have to double check, but they were up big against LSU. It looked like the game was actually in the bag, and Mike Leach said, just keep throwing the football. Don't forget, Costello threw the ball 60 times last week. 60 times against LSU's defense. What do you think he's going to do to Arkansas's defense? That line is just very intriguing to me. The fact that it's only 17 is a little surprising. Maybe Vegas knows something. Even though it's at Mississippi State, they're ranked now. They're the hot commodity right now. Maybe Arkansas has a bounce-back game when they keep that one close. But the way that offense played last week for Mississippi State, I don't see it. When you have your quarterback throw for over 600 yards and he has 5 touchdowns, I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. And even the running back, Kylan Hill, I mean, there's playmakers all over the field. Mike Leach turned one of the better running backs in the SEC into a bona fide receiver. Kylan Hill had, I believe, less than 40 yards rushing last week. He had over 150 yards receiving and a touchdown. I mean, this guy's quite the playmaker. 7 carries, 34 yards last week, officially, for Kylan Hill, one of the best running backs in the SEC. You know what he did receiving wise? 8 catches, 158 yards and a touchdown. And that's not even accounting for Osiris Mitchell, who had 7 for 183 and 2 touchdowns. I mean, there are playmakers all over the field for Mississippi State. So if you're looking at a game that might surprise you a little bit, at least with the over-under in that one as well, but I'm looking at that minus 17 line. It's interesting to me. I'm not going to touch it for my pick segment later, but the fact that Mississippi State is only a 17-point favorite at home and not around 20, 21, or even, God forbid, 23, 24, where they're really pushing for the 4-score victory, I'm just surprised they're not given more credit after what they did last week to LSU. The over-under in that game is 69. Now, if you take into account they scored 44 last week, you need Arkansas to score more than 7. So, to me, that looks like a 45-20 type score, and it would hit the under. Unless you think Mississippi State is going to put up at least a 50 spot this week, that over-under is looking a little too high for me. So I wanted to throw that out there, the fact that I had to remind you folks that the game to watch last week was Mississippi State against LSU, and sure enough, Mississippi State showed out, and they got the upset on the road over Ed Orgeron's squad. And that leads me into Arkansas's last opponent, Georgia, who takes on Auburn. That's arguably the game of the night. I mean, if you're not a Auburn or Georgia fan, and you're a fan of somebody else, then maybe it's not the game of the night for you, but this is the game of the night, folks. This is the game of the night, game of the week. It's in the SEC, and this is why we love SEC football coming back. Auburn at Georgia, number 7 Auburn, number 4 Georgia. Georgia right now is 6.5-point favorite. I'll reveal my official pick later, but what I really wanted to focus on for Georgia is their quarterback position. So they have DeJuan Mathis, right? So let's take a little history lesson, a recent history lesson here for Georgia, all right? So they go from Jake Fromm, a 3-year starter. He goes to the NFL, 5th-round draft pick by the Buffalo Bills, 6th-round draft pick. Coming from me, I thought the guy was going to be a 1st-round draft pick. But that's just me. Maybe that's how I missed on my quarterback evaluations. But what I saw last week from Georgia, you go from DeJuan Mathis, who ended up winning the job for Georgia only because they had a grad transfer quarterback in Jamie Newman, who was a transfer over from Wake Forest. He was expected to win the job, give Georgia an automatic put Georgia as the favorite in the SEC East and a college football playoff contender. Maybe he was a dark horse Heisman contender. He was going to be that good in Todd Monken's offense here at Georgia, apparently, but he decides to opt out of the season, so he is preparing for the NFL draft. Now what do? Well, before he opted out, JT Daniels, a quarterback from LSU, he transferred into the program. Now, if you know the name JT Daniels, he played for USC the past 2 years, right? 18 and 19. 2018, he's a true freshman starter, looks pretty solid. They don't do anything special that year, but it's like, okay, the Trojans might have their quarterback of the future here. They might have him for the next 2-3 years, depending on how good he is. Maybe he jumps to the NFL. Fast forward to 2019, season opener for USC. JT Daniels goes down. Torn ACL, out for the season. He's done. Keaton Slovis takes over, and Slovis looks the part, looks better than Daniels, and all of a sudden USC's like, we got to go with this guy. Keaton Slovis is, he's better. we're going to go with this guy. All right, he's a lot better. So where's that leave JT Daniels? There was a lot of rumors that he was going to stay within the program. He liked Clay Helton. He liked working with Slovis in the quarterback room. But unfortunately for USC, they weren't going to keep both. So Daniels ultimately decided to transfer, and then of course with what happened over the summer in terms of COVID and affecting the college football season, nobody had any idea whether Daniels was going to transfer right away, and he was going to take an automatic red shirt wherever he transferred, or he's going to fight for immediate eligibility. Sure enough, he picks Georgia, despite the fact that Jamie Newman's there. Now, if you're looking at Daniels, he is only a redshirt freshman because he... sorry, I take that back. He is a redshirt. He'll be a red. He's a redshirt sophomore this year. I take that back because he was a true freshman when he played. He got hurt his sophomore year, so that it counts as his redshirt year there. So he's a redshirt sophomore. All right, he's got a couple years left of eligibility. If you have to sit one year behind Jamie Newman, but relearn the position in a different system and get used to SEC football, that's fine. But Newman opts out, so everyone naturally assumes Daniels is going to be the starter. Not so fast. He was never medically cleared until earlier this week, on a Monday. So as of Saturday morning, we don't know who the starter is going to be. And this line is still in favor of Georgia because they're the higher-ranked team. They have a better defense, so to speak, and they have the powerful running game with Zamir White. If they can actually use him, more often than not. So let's go back to last week with no JT Daniels for Georgia. All right, what do? DeJuan Mathis wins the starting quarterback gig. Now, he's not your traditional pro-style quarterback that Georgia usually likes. He's more of a dual-threat type of quarterback, and he showed why he won the starting job, but struggled against Arkansas, like I mentioned earlier in the show. In comes Stetson Bennett. Who? Who the heck is Stetson Bennett? Bennett comes in. He ultimately leads the team to victory, shakes off a few rough drives, and then he looks pretty good. Now what do you do at quarterback? Because JT Daniels was medically cleared on Monday, and this seems to be gamesmanship from Georgia the whole week. Now you're making Auburn worry about 3 different quarterbacks. But as of Saturday morning at this time right now, there's who's the starter? We might not find out until kickoff. JT Daniels, I would think, should be the starter, considering they wanted him to transfer into the program. But is he good enough to play yet? The only reps he's really seen are scrimmages. He hasn't had the SEC game experience yet. More than likely, Stetson Bennett's your starter. If he struggles, then who do you go to off the bench? Do you go to Mathis, who played last week, or do you go to Daniels? Ultimately, I think Daniels is going to end up starting this season at some point. But it's a matter of when. And Georgia needs to figure out this quarterback position. It's going to affect their lines all season long, depending on who's the quarterback and depending on how they play week to week. I'm still shocked. With no starter the entire week, this line has stayed at 6.5. Maybe Vegas is just waiting on the actual starter, then it's going to shift last second. I would think if Daniels is in there, based on how he played as a freshman at USC, it'll stay around 6.5, maybe bump up to 7. But if you throw Bennett in there, probably stays the same. If Mathis is in there, it might go down. And all of a sudden you're looking at Auburn. It's maybe a plus 5.5 for Auburn, plus 5, plus 6, 4.5 maybe. We dare move it up 2 points. it's really tough to pick this one just because you don't know who the quarterback is going to be from Georgia, unless you're that confident Auburn's going to win. It's a close matchup, on paper at least. But ultimately for Georgia to be competitive for the college football playoff, to be competitive in the SEC East at least, they got to figure out who their quarterback is, and he's got to be the starter for the remainder of the season, barring injury, of course. But you look at Florida. Look at Florida in the SEC East. Kyle Trask threw 6 touchdowns last week, and tight end Kyle Pitts looks like the number 1 overall pick all of a sudden because he was so darn good against Ole Miss. I mean, Florida's offense is loaded right now. With that combination, that's a quarterback and a tight end. Try stopping that. You know the SEC likes the big boys. Kyle Trask looks like the best quarterback in the SEC right now, to me at least. Florida looks like the best team not named Alabama in the SEC right now. So if you're Georgia, you look like you were the favorite on paper going into the year with Jamie Newman. Now you have a quarterback carousel, and you have to pick between 3 different guys. One who had true freshman experience, and the last 2 who made their debuts, for the most part, last week in a seesaw type of game against Arkansas. You tell me who's the favorite. You tell me how that's going to affect their lines. Georgia's going to be affected. Even at home, they're going to have some weird lines. They're not going to be favored by much in some of these games if they're playing the quality of opponents that are around their same caliber. If they're playing teams like Arkansas again, or they're playing, I don't know, a down Kentucky team, or they're going to play Ole Miss, I mean, don't be shocked if Georgia is upset and you have to throw out your betting slip because Georgia screwed it up for you this week. Just a little tease there for later in the show. Remind you, Nick's picks coming in the final segment of the show. Give you my 5-pack of picks, 4, 3, and 2 on the season. So we had 2 pushes last week. Oh, that angers me, folks. But it's all right. 2 pushes is better than 2 losses. Nobody wins money, but nobody loses money. Gotta look at the positives. Just a reminder, you can follow me on Twitter at NickKosko59, NickKosko59. Find me on Twitter. You can follow, of course, the station at 1490 Sportsbet, and of course follow our guys Rich Quinones and Ryan Rothstein, some of our local hosts right here, at Rich Q on Q and at Wise Rye, R-Y-E. I have to ask Rothstein eventually about how many times he's changed his Twitter handle. Oh my goodness, I've had the same Twitter handle for I think 7-8 years now. I have to get his input on why he changes that so often. All right, we are going to step aside and take a quick break. On the other side, we'll break down more of these games coming up today, and of course, the final segment of the show, I'll give you my 5 picks, Nick's picks, which of course you can always hear on Back Your Play with Rich Quinones. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, you can hear my segment on Wednesdays at 4:20 p.m. And of course, as I mentioned, Ryan Rothstein, you can follow him on Twitter at WiseRyan. Of course, catch his show Monday through Friday night, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. The Fix with Ryan Rothstein right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. I like that. I like how he's doing the show overnight. He gives you the live in-game updates. He'll give you some crazy lines, the movements, and he'll give you some crazy prop bets too. The guy's all over it, so I give him props for that. I will step aside, take a quick break. It is College Football Pick'em presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Betting college football? You've come to the right place. It's College Football Pick'em, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Welcome back to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu. I'm your host, Nick Kosko, and we're going to keep it rolling here with Week 5 of college football here today, this afternoon, tonight. And of course, I'll give you my 5 picks in the final segment of the show. 4, 3, and 2 on the season. So we are in the green, folks. We are above 500. Ignore those 2 ties. I mean, I'm sure. In this area, a lot of people know about ties with the Philadelphia Eagles, my Philadelphia Eagles. So ties aren't good in the real world. But in the betting world, you don't lose anything. That's my motto. If you get a push, it sucks, but you know what? You don't lose anything. That's all right. You can follow me on Twitter, just as a reminder, at NickKosko59, NickKosko59. And of course, follow the station AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Follow on Twitter at 1490 SportsBet. Follow my guys Rich Quinones and Ryan Rothstein as well at Rich Q on Q and at Wise Rye as well for all the latest dealings in the sports world and the sports gambling world. So we're going to continue on with our look ahead to today's slate before I get into my picks in the final segment of the show. I teased Alabama and Texas A&M before, and the only reason why I did that was because I'm interested to see if Alabama can absolutely just throttle this football team. Alabama took care of business last week against Missouri, 38-19, and right now they are currently a 17.5 point favorite at home, 3:30 game against Texas A&M. Texas A&M is number 13 in the country. Alabama number 2, of course. But Texas A&M, it's amazing. This line, I mentioned it before how I thought Mississippi State was going to be favored by a lot more over Arkansas this week rather than a 17-point line. And I'm doing the same thing right now with Alabama, although I probably shouldn't be too shocked that the line is right where it is just because Texas A&M is a top 15 team in the country as of now. But if you go back to Texas A&M's first game last week, the lowly Vanderbilt Commodores, no offense to Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt's not a world beater. Texas A&M was ranked 10th last week. They dropped 3 spots. Of course, you re-add the Big Ten and the Pac-12 into the polls. That can happen despite a win. But Texas A&M scraped out a 17-12 victory. They were up 15-12 going into the fourth quarter. All they did was score a field goal in the fourth quarter to go up by 5. So they never really put this game away. It's amazing to me how, again, just going on the previous week, how these lines aren't shifted in vast favor of the better football team, in which this case it's Alabama. Now, being a number 2 versus number 13 matchup, is Alabama being a 17.5 point favorite huge in a normal year? Absolutely. But I'm actually surprised it's not, at 20 or even 19, 20, 21, how this team is not almost a 3-touchdown favorite. Alabama looks like they haven't missed a step. I can't say they look better than last year because last year they looked really good. Then Tua Tagovailoa gets hurt, and of course LSU was the world beater last year, right? But this guy Mac Jones, who everyone thought was going to be pretty good, he filled in nicely last year. Mac Jones, the quarterback. Everyone thought he was going to be good, but, he looked really solid against Missouri. And again, it's Missouri. Some of these teams were, some of these top SEC schools were facing the lower tier SEC programs, at least for 2020. Missouri's not a world beater. But Mac Jones, 18-24, 249 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's what you want. Solid quarterback play. High percentage passes, 250 to 300 yards, a touchdown or 2, maybe even 3 on a good day. That's fine. Alabama can operate like that because they know they dominate the offensive and defensive lines. They dominate on defense. Dylan Moses is back, Alabama. Oh my goodness, what a linebacker he is. All right, he is back after missing the entire year last year. And don't forget, Alabama can win on offense, as they showed the past couple of years with Tua Tagovailoa, at least the past 2 years when he was the full-time starter. He could sling it, and he was the number 5 pick back in April for a reason by the Miami Dolphins, and he's probably going to make his debut within the next couple weeks, for all we know. So there's a reason why the offense is now scary in Alabama, rather than just, you have a pedestrian quarterback who kind of game manages, who's a game manager. They run the football effectively, and they play great defense. That's kind of how Georgia operates right now. Alabama has evolved to the point where they can have a solid quarterback, or even, obviously a top 5 pick quarterback in Tua, but they go from Tua to Mac Jones, who, I'm not going to say his NFL potential yet. Maybe he'll get picked up by a team drafted late, but Mac Jones is a solid quarterback, and he's got the playmakers around him. People are calling running back Najee Harris an outside Heisman candidate. He had 17 carries, 98 yards, and 3 touchdowns against Missouri. Najee Harris is one of the most dangerous running backs in the SEC, in the country. I mentioned how good Kylan Hill was for Mississippi State, how he's arguably the best. You could make the argument, or he's at least one of the best. Najee Harris is this good. Najee Harris is a Heisman contender. He is so good at running back for Alabama. And then don't forget Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith, the wide receivers for Alabama. They're basically their new wide receiver factory. So this is why I'm surprised how loaded they are. And against the Texas A&M squad that dropped 3 spots in the rankings, barely beat Vanderbilt last week, how is Alabama only a 17.5 point favorite? It's really fascinating to me how Alabama isn't just favored by more, and how they're not going to roll through teams this year until they get to the the crux of their schedule, and obviously the SEC championship game in the college football playoff. I mean, Bama is one of my four teams to get in the playoff. But you look at their upcoming schedule. I mean, this is their this is their toughest game until 2 weeks from now when they have to take on Georgia, and who knows where Georgia's going to be at that point. Georgia is going to be a fascinating matchup in Tuscaloosa for Alabama, but who knows where the Bulldogs are going to be. I fully expect Alabama to be 3-0 going into that game. I expect them to take care of business tonight, and then take care of business on the road at Ole Miss. And Nick Saban's going to, give a little rub into his former assistant coach Lane Kiffin. He's going to beat him up a little bit. But they have Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi State right after that, all ranked right now, and then LSU. So they have 4 straight ranked opponents after the Ole Miss game. Kentucky, then they have the Iron Bowl against Auburn on the 28th, and then December 5th, they end the season at Arkansas. So you can't tell me that Alabama can't go undefeated this year. I absolutely can see them going undefeated, at least in the regular season. Then you have to see what they do in the SEC championship game, and then the college football playoff. I expect them to get to the playoff. Perhaps we get 2 SEC teams this year. Little tease. That's right. I mean, I actually picked Florida to get to the college football playoff. They were my 4 teams, but I could easily see 2 SEC teams getting in, where you have Florida and Alabama, and then all of a sudden you have like Ohio State from the Big Ten and Clemson from the ACC. Big 12 might get shut out this year. I think the SEC, the top tier SEC teams are going to be so good, and Alabama's in that class. Alabama's in that top tier class, and again, this is why this line really hasn't shifted, and I could easily see them being a huge favorite on the road next week if they just dominate like they did last week, and if they do that today against Texas A&M. So when you look at Alabama and the 17.5, I'm not going to outwardly say go take it. It's tough to take that, but they are at home. They are at home. My issue is, it's a better squad now than Vanderbilt. They didn't look good last week, Texas A&M. But is Alabama going to put up 38, 40 points again? The over-under is right at 52.5. I'm inclined to take that over. Because Alabama seems to be a team now that's going to at least put up 35 points a game. At least. They're improving. And again, they gave up 19 points to Missouri. And again, some garbage time, just some cheap scores, but that's fine. Texas A&M, to me, could score at least 3 touchdowns. 21. Alabama goes up, a 35-21 victory for Alabama. They wouldn't cover, but that over-under would hit. That's enticing to me. I think Alabama is a prime candidate to possibly cover, but that over is definitely going to hit in this game. 52.5, it's got to hit. It absolutely has to hit. If Kellen Mond, the quarterback for Texas A&M, is awake, and we threw for a touchdown, 189 yards last week. They have Spiller in the backfield. He's the go-to guy in that offense. He had 117 yards last week. If those 2 guys can get it rolling, they'll put up a few scores. But Alabama, to me, is just going to be. They're going to be tough to bet this year because they're going to have a lot of these lines where they're huge favorites like that, and they're probably going to win all, if not, or most, if not all, of their games. Just when are they going to cover? How could you bet Alabama this year if they're going to be favored by at least 2 touchdowns every week? Maybe not against Georgia or Auburn, but it seems like every other game they're going to have at least, they're going to be favored by at least 10 points, if not 11 points. That's just the way they're playing, and the rest of the SEC is trying to catch up. So I'd personally stay away from the 17.5, but that over-under, that looks good. 52.5, that looks good. Alabama can just, at this point, when their offense gets rolling, and it does usually a lot, the more games this offense has to. The offense has played together before. Don't forget, all these guys are coming back from last year. Mac Jones is the quarterback, Najee Harris the running back, Waddle and Smith the receivers. They're all coming back. They were all playing last year. Devontae Smith caught the game-winning touchdown in the national championship game a couple of years ago when Alabama beat Georgia. Don't forget that. That was Devontae Smith. Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs aside, who are starring in the NFL now, including Jerry Jeudy the other night on Thursday night for the Broncos, looked fantastic. Aside from those NFL caliber receivers, they still have NFL caliber receivers on the roster. They have an NFL caliber running back on the roster, and you have a solid quarterback. You know what? Give me Alabama in that one. They're going to win every game. It's just a matter if they're going to cover those huge spreads. And they won by 19 last week. Are they going to beat Texas A&M by 19, 20 points this week? It's possible. I'm just a little wary of that line. I feel like Texas A&M always plays them well, whether they lose or not. They can play them well. But that over-under, I see Bama putting up at least 35 points this afternoon, at least 35, and then you're up. And then you're worrying about the Aggies putting up at least 20. Then you're golden for that over/under. But I like the over in that game. Moving along here, Big 12. What do you do? What do you do in the Big 12? Seriously, how do you pick this conference? Oklahoma loses to Kansas State. Texas almost gets upset by Texas Tech. What does this conference do for you? Seriously. The Big 12 is so random. And guess what? I'm going to be picking 2 Big 12 games in my pick segment coming up. But Texas, the Longhorns, they're a top 10 team now. They are coming off a 63-56 victory over Texas Tech in overtime. In a game where Texas Tech had them on the ropes. It was over, folks. This game was over. It was 56-41. This game was over. 4-play drive for a touchdown. They get the onside kick. Oh, my goodness. 6-play drive for a touchdown. Texas Tech punts. They had 5 plays, 40 seconds. Boom, punt. Then you go to overtime. Touchdown Texas, and then 4 plays, -4 yards Texas Tech on their overtime drive. I mean, talk about a collapse for Texas Tech, by the way. Giving up 22 unanswered. But, again, I know that was on the road in the Big 12, and the Big 12 is just so random because the offenses are absurd and most of the defenses are just awful. But Texas will go as Sam Ehlinger goes, their quarterback. Looked good last week in the comeback. He led the charge. Don't get me wrong. He led the charge last week to get them that victory. 5 touchdowns, 262, only 1 pick. He was 27-40. I mean, he played well, and he led the charge. But they have a really intriguing game with TCU. Noon today, they host TCU. That line has shifted from 11.5. Now it's 12. Earlier in the week, it was 11.5 for Texas. Now it's 12. -12 for Texas at home. But this one could be upset worthy. TCU has won 6 of the last 8 games for the Longhorns. And that's since TCU joined the Big 12. But, if you're looking at the matchups, defensive line advantage for Texas over the offensive line, that could cause TCU to really not score today. And that TCU offensive line struggled with Iowa State last week. And that was one of our losers last week, folks. TCU lost by 3 points last week. We had them at +2.5 at home. And that was our loser last week. And I mentioned how Max Duggan, the TCU quarterback, was the reason why they could win that football game because he came back. He was off the injured and COVID list. He was 16 of 19 last week, 241 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, he didn't play the entire game. If he plays the entire game this time, I'm not saying TCU's going to upset this game or upset Texas, but their history against Texas is kind of noteworthy. And the fact that Texas the line has moved from 11.5 to 12 means people think Texas is going to blow out TCU. At this point, with Oklahoma losing to Kansas State last week, you think Oklahoma's due for a bounce back game. But at this point, you're like, okay, maybe Texas is the team to beat in the Big 12. Because Oklahoma State looks like a mess. Oklahoma, of course, had the loss. And Texas, I know it was a comeback victory against Texas Tech. But they're 2-0, they're a top 10 team, and they're currently the best team in the Big 12. Currently, through 2 games. But you have to be wary of Gary Patterson and TCU here. I don't know why, but how do you win 6 of 8 against this team? TCU hasn't been world beaters in the Big 12. They've had some good years. But you would think in this day and age, in 2020, TCU have no shot. They have no shot in this game. But they do, apparently. You take 6 of 8 from the Texas Longhorns, but the people are betting Texas right now. They're confident in the Longhorns to cover this spread. Now, I mean, they beat Texas Tech by 7 points, right? in a more natural game at home, could they realistically just beat TCU by 14, 17 points? I'd say so. But you got to watch out. Gotta watch out. We know there's no defense in the Big 12. There's barely defense in the Big 12. Texas may have the advantage on the defensive line against TCU's offensive line. But I'll tell you what, if Texas can't stop a lick again, like they couldn't last week against Texas Tech, Max Duggan could cause some damage for TCU. Look out, folks. This noon game is going to be very interesting. TCU's only played one game, don't forget. They've only played one game. Shake off the rust. Game 2 could be better. I'm just saying, watch out for that one. Upset watch. Don't be afraid to take TCU plus 12. Over-under set at 63. That's probably about right. These two, everybody scores at will in these games. They score at will in the Big Ten. We know it's absurd. Couple other games on the slate. Oklahoma State 2-0, a very weak 2-0 team. If you ask me, they're ranked number 17. They are 22.5-point favorites at Kansas. And poor Les Miles. Who knows when he's going to turn that program around, but Kansas does not look good right now. 0-2 so far. We mentioned Texas Tech last week, or just before, in their near upset victory over Texas. They actually take on Kansas State this week. It's in Kansas State. Wildcats are only a 2.5-point favorite at home. That's practically a pick'em game right there. You want to talk about two teams that made a lot of noise in the Big 12 last week in a upset win, in a near upset win? That's an intriguing game at 3:30. We mentioned Oklahoma a little bit, and I'll dive into them more in the next segment, during the pick segment. They dropped to number 18 in the country after that loss. Jeez. Iowa State's 1-1. We mentioned how Iowa State just squeaked by TCU last week. Those are intriguing games within the Big 12 today. Other SEC matchups that we didn't mention. I mentioned Florida. They're ranked number 3 now in the polls. And I told you guys I love Florida this year. They put up 51 points last week. I know they gave up 35 to Ole Miss, but they should dominate South Carolina at noon today. Again, Kyle Trask. I think he's my favorite. Right now, he's my favorite quarterback in the country. He's not the best quarterback in the country. That goes to Trevor Lawrence of Clemson, of course, and Justin Fields of Ohio State, and even Trey Lance over at North Dakota State. Those are probably going to be your top 3 picks in the draft next year. But Kyle Trask, man, he looks so good, and I think Florida's going to mop the floor with South Carolina. Tennessee hosts Missouri at noon. Tennessee's minus 12, over under 48.5. Pittsburgh was one of our teams that pushed last week. We had we had a minus 3 last week. They pushed. They were one of the 2 pushes. They are a 14-point favorite at home against NC State. We're going to dive into North Carolina and Boston College coming up next. Group of 5 action at 3:30. Number 15, Cincinnati, hosting South Florida. Cincinnati's a 21-point favorite. My goodness, I can't touch that. If Cincinnati gets into the top 10 this year, if any group of 5 team is actually threatening for the college football playoff this year, I'd be surprised now that the Big Ten and Pac-12 are back. But hey, if Cincinnati and Central Florida keep winning, anything's possible in this crazy year of 2020. But speaking of UCF, they're ranked number 11. They're 2-0 this season. They're going to host Tulsa. Tulsa's the team that gave us a lot of trouble the other week against Oklahoma State, because that game was just that was just a poor excuse of a game for Oklahoma State. But Central Florida is a 21-point favorite at 7:30 tonight. We mentioned Mississippi State and Arkansas. Oklahoma plays Iowa State, as we mentioned, at 7:30 tonight. We'll dive into that next. And LSU looking for a bounce-back win over Vanderbilt as well. They're on the road at 7:30 tonight. 21-point favorite LSU is on the road. And don't forget, folks, before we take a break, I can't mention. I almost refuse to mention Clemson in any of these games until they play some real ACC competition, and that's coming. When they take on Miami, because Miami has 2 weeks to prepare now. Miami has a bye week until they have a bye week today. They are taking on Clemson next week on the 10th. That's the primetime game, 7:30. I can't wait till next week till we dive into that game. Miami is 2-0, or excuse me, 3-0, 2-0. What are they? Losing here, 3-0, folks. Yes, they play 3 games and now they have this bye week. Yes, 7:30 at Clemson. Miami could move up the polls depending on how things shake out. But they're number 8 right now. Clemson's number 1. They're going to stay number 1. Okay, the game against Virginia today, folks, it's 28.5. No thanks. I don't care if they beat them by 40. I'm not, folks. We're not touching Clemson until they play Miami, if at all. Then we'll talk about Clemson when they play the North Carolinas, when they play the Notre Dames, when they play the ACC championship game or the college football playoff. We're waiting on Clemson, but they play at 8 o'clock tonight against Virginia. Virginia won though, 1-0. No shot though. They're not beating Clemson. They might not even cover. I could see Clemson winning by 5 touchdowns. They're just that good. All right, we are going to step aside and take a quick break. On the other side, we'll dive into my picks. We are 4-3-2 on the season. It's time to go 5-0. We need a 5-0 week, folks, and then I'm really going to start bragging to Rich, to Ryan. I'm going to brag to all the guys. We love bragging when we win these bets, but like a good person, I will say damn, that was a loser. Should have known better. We are going to do better. All right, next picks coming up in the next segment. It's College Football Pick'em on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu.
Now back to College Football Pick'em with Nick Kosko, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio.
Welcome back to College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio, presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu, located inside the Attila's Gym in Egg Harbor Township. I'm your host, Nick Kosko. Final segment of the show, Nick's Picks. I'll give you my 5-pack of picks leading into today's slate of college football. And again, I mentioned all show, 4-3-2. Not proud of the record, but we are above 500. Don't worry. And hopefully we don't have any 2 more pushes or ties. And hopefully the Eagles don't do that as well, for all my Eagle fans out there. All right, so we mentioned the big slate today. Dove into what's good, what's not good, what looks really good, i.e. Alabama and Clemson. Not for betting. Clemson, not for betting purposes, as we just mentioned earlier in the show. No, we can't do that. Before we dive into my 5 picks, just a reminder, you can follow me and the station and everybody else on social media. Be sure to check us out on Twitter. I am at Nick Kosko 59, NickKosko 59 on Twitter. Give me a follow there and give our station a follow as well at 1490 Sports Bet. That's our official station account on Twitter. Follow my guys, Rich Quinones and Ryan Rothstein as well, at Rich Q on Q, host of Back Your Play. And, of course, at Wise Rye, he hosts The Fix with Ryan Rothstein, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Monday through Friday. Rich is Tuesday and Wednesday, 4 to 6 during your little afternoon drive. And Rich just announced a little boxing show. So congratulations to him. He'll be adding that to our station's lineup as well on, I believe it was Wednesday nights. He's still working out the kinks a little bit, but good for Rich and, of course, good for our station as well. All right, let's dive into these games here. So, again, 4-3-2 on the year. We'll start with South Carolina and Florida. Now, I mentioned to you guys how much I love Florida this year, and it's because of Dan Mullen, the head coach, and Kyle Trask, the quarterback. All right, they're number 3 in the country right now. Again, it was one game. It was Ole Miss. I know they gave up 35 points, but Florida, to me, folks, looks like a playoff team this year. I mentioned earlier in the show, I honestly believe we're going to see a combination of Clemson, Ohio State, Bama, and Florida in the Final Four. I think the Big 12 could end up getting shut out this year, and forget the Pac-12 when they start in November. I know they're going to delay the vote a little bit for them to at least have a shot, but I don't see it happening. I think we're going to get Florida, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State in some sort of order at the end of the year. But Florida, to me, 17.5-point favorite. At home, over-under set at 57.5, but got to go with Florida in this one. I think Trask is going to pick up right where he left off. Ole Miss, maybe a better quality opponent than South Carolina, but Trask was 30 of 42 last week, 416 and 6 touchdowns. Boy, Kyle Pitts. If South Carolina can limit Kyle Pitts today, maybe they have a shot to cover. But he had 8 catches, 170 yards, and 4 touchdowns last week, folks. Kyle Pitts, the tight end, Kyle Pitts. My goodness, he looks like a superstar last week. So I like Florida, 17.5. Give me them at home to cover, and they're going to keep rolling on into next week as well. All right, next game, Auburn at Georgia. We talked about them at the open of the show. Auburn is plus 6.5 on the road. And folks, if you couldn't tell about how I was talking about this game earlier, I'm going with Auburn. There's just too much uncertainty at quarterback for Georgia. And former Georgia quarterback Aaron Murray said earlier this week, if Georgia just focused more on the pieces around the quarterback this year and just plugged in the guy they thought that could just give them the best game management in layman's terms, they'd be fine. They'd be the regular Georgia until they can recruit those type of athletes to make their offense look like an LSU from last year, or how Alabama has developed over the past couple of years with Tua and now Mac Jones. But there's just too much uncertainty. I think if JT Daniels gets the start, it's going to be a mess. I shouldn't say a mess, but they don't have a concrete plan at quarterback, and Auburn does with Bo Nix, and that plus 6.5 is just too enticing to take on the road. Now, if they lose by a touchdown, we're screwed, folks. But I'll tell you what, I think Auburn's going to win this game outright. I think Auburn's going to go on the road, win this game outright, and they are going to be the top competition for Alabama in the SEC West. So give me Auburn plus 6.5 on the road at Georgia. Over-under for that game, by the way, set at 44.5. So that just goes to show you that they are not confident in Georgia's offense against a better squad this year. Vegas isn't, at least. All right, now game number 3, Oklahoma at Iowa State, 7:30 tonight. And we mentioned before how Oklahoma took a big drop after their loss last week to Kansas State. Spencer Rattler, I like him. He's a good quarterback, great fit for Lincoln Riley's system. I think they're due for a bounce-back game here. Now, is Oklahoma going to make the playoff now after that horrendous loss last week? I don't know. It's a long season, folks. We've only played 2 games, mostly. Most teams have only played 2 games. But Oklahoma, on the road, Iowa State's a little bit tricky, but I don't think Brock Purdy, the quarterback for Iowa State, is as good as he was made out to be. I don't think the Cyclones are going to be able to keep up with the Oklahoma offense. And Oklahoma is, I hate taking road favorites, but only a touchdown favorite for Oklahoma over Iowa State. Usually that line would be a lot higher, maybe like a -10, -11, even a -12 for Oklahoma on the road. But, the fact that it's only a 1-score game, I think they're going to win by double digits. You got to give me Oklahoma in this one. I like Oklahoma -7 on the road at Iowa State. All right, game number 4, a interesting one here. North Carolina at Boston College. North Carolina has played one game, folks. They won one game. They're 1-0 a couple weeks ago at home against Syracuse. 31-6. I get that, but Sam Howell didn't look as good. He was a breakout freshman quarterback last year. Supposed to be a dark horse Heisman candidate this year. They didn't look as good. There was mistakes. There was mistake football all over the field. Syracuse limited them, and then Syracuse saved us the other week in a bet as well against Pittsburgh. So, am I that confident in North Carolina as I was maybe in the preseason? Not necessarily. And Boston College, and I told Rich this on Wednesday. They basically dominated Duke the first game, 26-6. That was one of our losers because I didn't think Boston College was going to be any good this year. And then they had to come back to win to beat Texas State last week. All right, I get it. It's Texas State. Even my alma mater, Rutgers, can beat up Texas State. But Boston College is 2-0, and now they're feeling themselves a little bit. And they're plus 14 at home against a North Carolina squad that might not be as good as advertised. Middle of the pack, top 15 team, and we'll get a huge win maybe here or there, but they're not going to be world beaters all year. This is why I'm intrigued by this one. Now, do I think Boston College is going to win outright? No, I don't think so. But that plus 14, folks, that's really interesting. The fact that they are such a huge home dog, and you mentioned how I hate taking road favorites. Well, I hate it here too, so I'm going to take Boston College plus 14. Jeff Hafley, first-year head coach. He's got something wrong. He's got something brewing a little bit. And I'll tell you what, if they actually pull off an upset today, oh my goodness. Watch at 3:30 on ABC, North Carolina, Boston College. That's going to be interesting. Phil Jurgovec, the quarterback for Boston College, who transferred in. He's a former Notre Dame backup. He's looked pretty good. So through 2 games, 43 of 61, 510, 3 touchdowns. He looks pretty good. And if Boston College has steady quarterback play, I'll tell you what, that plus 14, you're going to get your money's worth today with that plus 14. All right, game number 5, our final game of the segment. Baylor at West Virginia. Baylor's a 3-point favorite on the road. And, man, I don't like this. I don't like this game for West Virginia. They lost to a banged-up We mentioned Oklahoma State is probably a big-time pretender this year. West Virginia barely beat them, or barely lost to them. They lost 27-13. They scored 13 points on a banged-up Oklahoma State team. It's not good. Baylor being a 3-point favorite on the road is not that much for me. Baylor looks good. That line's actually shifted to 2.5 on some books I'm looking at. So this one's almost down to a pick'em, folks. Baylor had 2 games postponed. They beat up Kansas 47-14 in their first and only game this year. This is a noon game. I like Baylor. I like the head coach Dave Aranda, the former defensive coordinator for LSU, and I think Baylor's coming here to prove a point that they are not going to be, they're going to make some noise in Aranda's first year. He's instilled a new culture over there, and I like it. So I like Baylor -3, 2.5 on some books, folks. So we got it at -3, so we're going to stick with that. It's not like the Auburn line last week where we went from 10 to 7.5. Like we're not going to change the line here for our pick segment here. But I like Baylor -3 here. I just what is West Virginia going to do here? I hated that performance against Oklahoma State. He only put up 13 points on that squad. It's a banged up team right now. It's a game that's a game that could have went the other way. So I like Baylor on the road. Oh, it's not a pick'em, but it's -3. It's close enough to me where I'll take 2 road favorites this week. All right, so just to recap real quick, we have Florida -17.5, Auburn +6.5, Oklahoma -7 on the road, Boston College +14 at home, and Baylor -3 on the road. Those are your 5-pack of picks. Those are Nick's picks here for this week on College Football Pick'em. So that's going to do it for me, folks. Enjoy the games today. We're going to have a great slate, as I mentioned. With the SEC back, it just increases it and just increases the quality so you get more to choose from. And then we are now 3 weeks away, folks, from Big Ten football coming back and as well as Mountain West football coming back. Then 5 weeks away from the Pac-12 coming back as well. So we are about to get into the crux of college football here in October, usually the best month of college football before we get into deep November with the rivalry games and, of course, the conference championship games. But October is just a wild month for college football. We love it. So that'll do it for me. I am Nick Kosko saying so long. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at NickKosko59. Follow the station as well at 1490 SportsBet. This has been College Football Pick'em right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio presented by Harbor Jiu-Jitsu.